slightly less than a week since the last one went live, but next Pocketables weekly news roundup. And today we've got a lot of stuff to talk about and also just one really big thing to talk about. So let's get a couple of the smaller items out of the way first. I say smaller. They're important to Pocketables, but not necessarily the entire tech industry at large. And I think I'm going to bump the gain. On my microphone just a little bit. I don't seem to be hitting quite the levels that I want. You know what? Let's bump it here in OBS. All right, so yeah, that's more in line with what I want. Anyway, first up, obviously we're using the hybrid NW700 BM3000 microphone. Basically, this thing is a terrible abomination that I have concocted. It is the electronics out of an NW700 fused to the body of a BM3000 microphone that I picked up because the NW1500 or BM1500 that Newer actually sells and would have included decent electronics simply wasn't available. So I found something that looked like what I wanted and found out that there's a lot of companies using this same microphone shell, and not everybody's putting the same guts inside. So there'll be a couple of videos about that in the near future. But needless to say, this is the end result of 20 minutes of Frankenstein level mad science. And overall, I'm actually pleased with the result. If visually you liked this capsule style microphone, it's not the worst investment. It cost me less than $40 for the appearance mic and the donor electronics out of the NW700, and you can definitely get both of those cheaper than that. And I'm happy with how this looks on stream. Stream. Looks happy with how it looks while recording. So next up is some phone stuff. And this is a bit of an ironic statement for me. I've been writing for Pocketables for several years now, and I've put up bits and pieces about phones that I've purchased, but this is my first round having actual devices in to review. And what we have are the Cat S22. This is a smart Android-powered flip phone, and it's not going to set any new world records. It's a Snapdragon 215 device, and Android Go on it works. I'm not upset with the performance I get out of it, but I am left with the question of what kind of apps would someone use on this? I'm very pleased with the camera so far. I'm very pleased with the build quality, but it begs the question of someone who uses a flip phone but wants Android on it, what kind of applications are they running that I should be testing? Because I'm definitely not going to just want to scroll on like Imager or poke around on Discord or Slack on it, although I definitely see at least one communications app being part of its target software suite. But what else would you expect that they would use on a device like this? Let me know in the comments below, and that actually segues into the next device, and this is the Cat S62. And I'm hoping to get my hands on the S62 Pro. This one is a more traditional Android device, the bar style Android. And I've actually activated this. I'm using it as my day-to-day phone right now. And overall, like the normal stuff I expect an Android phone to do, it's doing quite well, although it's definitely slower than my OnePlus 7 Pro 5G. Now, that's not the target market for this. The target market for this is some form of trade worker, be it construction or HVAC or plumbing or an electrician, take your pick there, who needs an Android phone. And I'll probably actually connect this one to some of those ToolSmart tools that I had and, play with those. I've actually connected it to the OBD scanner I have with my car. Um, and needs an Android phone, but they need something a little more durable. And so far, I think this fits the bill. It's definitely got older hardware in it. The Snapdragon 660 is a decent chipset, but definitely approaching what I would consider end of life. It's a 2018 Snapdragon. This is currently running Android 10. They've announced that it's going to be updated to Android 11. That's probably end of the road for OS level updates on this phone. Although it's running a modern, I shouldn't say modern, it's running a current security update, so I'm going to see how Cat keeps up with those over the next month or so. But anyway, once again, what type of things do you think I should do with it? Obviously, I'm currently using it for everything, but is there a workflow or a killer feature that I haven't touched on this? And there is a killer feature for its actually larger sibling that makes a couple of trade-offs, and that is the S62 Pro has a FLIR thermal sensor available to it. And I'm hoping to get that one in the next week or two, and I'll probably switch from the 62 to the 62 Pro. Functionally, there's not a huge difference between them performance-wise, although the Pro does have more RAM. They've got the same SoC, so I don't expect some massive leap forward in performance. But that thermal sensor, I think, is the killer feature for these devices, especially looking at it price-wise. The sensor in it, it's a FLIR Lepton sensor. If I bought a device with that sensor alone to pair with this or any other Android phone, is like a $400 add-on. So the 62 Pro costs another $100 on top of the 62. And if you don't need some of the 62's features that it has that are different, this does have wireless charging, and it is non-incendiary, so it shouldn't cause any sparking if you're doing any work in a gas or oil type environment. But beyond those two bullet notes, they're largely the same phone. So if for another $100 I get a $400 sensor built into it, well, at $599, that's kind of a no-brainer if you have any application for a FLIR at all, which a lot of people do. I've wanted one for years because there's definitely times I want one to trace out a wire that, or check that my wiring's not overheating, look at the distribution of the thermal load and components and things, and there's a wide variety of applications for that make it an interesting value add, to say the least. One other note in phone news, actually, is Sony unveiled their Xperia Pro I. Now, this is a big deal. They're putting a 1-inch sensor out of one of their larger cameras in a phone. And there's a couple of trade-offs with that, and I'll leave DP Review to cover some of the disadvantages of doing that. There'll be a link to that in the description. But this is a huge sensor to bolt in a phone, and we've seen this a couple of times before. Sharp and Panasonic both have attempted putting big sensors in smartphones. That said, neither Sharp nor Panasonic really has the market to do that. And that's not to say that they don't know imaging sensors. Panasonic especially knows how to build cameras. Their GH series is a very popular one for mixed-use videography and photography. Those are Micro Four Thirds devices. They're part of that new mirrorless full-size group as well. So Panasonic knows the camera side. Panasonic phones just never were super popular or caught on. Sharp, I actually am more disappointed that their stuff didn't catch on. They had a couple of Aquos, I think it was called Aquos, line devices that looked very exciting, but they just never saw broad adoption here in the United States. But anyway, so the Xperia Pro I, big expensive phone with all the bells and whistles. Honestly, Sony's really great at making what looks like a fantastic flagship phone without some of the why does it cost so much compared to, say, Apple or Samsung. If I pay $2,000 for a Sony phone, I'm getting something. I'm getting HDMI input, I'm getting a 1-inch sensor, I'm getting features I want. $2,000 for an iPhone gets me more storage because I don't have a micro SD card and I don't have a USB-C slot to attach it to anything. I mean, that's just what it is. Why does it cost so much? Well, because it has a terabyte of storage. Great. That doesn't help me nearly as much as just a better camera or a thermal sensor or any number of pro level features that actually make a device interesting. So I guess that's enough bat picking on Apple there. We could talk about their new. Actually, probably should, but I'm going to gloss over the fact that they launched new Macs because I'm far more excited about the news that came out this week with Alder Lake. So, Alder Lake is here, but not quite. And what I mean by that is we have 90% of the details on the features. But what we don't have is any actual validatable benchmarks. That's not to say we don't have any. Intel released some benchmarks, and they were upfront about why those aren't necessarily the benchmarks that you want to use to make your purchase decision. They tested everything on Windows 11 because it's what they have to use to get the performance out of Alder Lake that we expect scheduler-wise. But before the patches went out to fix the scheduler issues on AMD. And I know people will say, oh my god, why would they do that? The fact of the matter is, some of those patches just weren't available when they did their testing. This is not Intel trying to pull a fast one. It's there. They owned up to it. It's documented. It's on the slides. They've told the tech press that, yes, we tested before those were available because it takes time to generate those slides and generate the data and run the benchmarks. But it also means that those benchmarks are not as useful as we would want. And honestly, vendor benchmarks never are. I don't care if it's Intel, if it's AMD, if it's Apple, if it's Dell, Lenovo, HP, anyone who's publishing benchmarks on their own hardware is generally going to pick what makes their hardware looks best. And sometimes that leads to slightly less than honest decisions. So Alder Lake is here and we've got a bunch of details on it. And honestly, there's a lot to be excited about, even if Alder Lake is not this holy shit, it's amazing CPU architecture. And what I mean by that is that the platform itself is massively evolved. And I fully expect some teething issues out of the gate. So let's start with what we're familiar with. So Z490 and Z590. That was Comet Lake and Rocket Lake. They were not really that dramatically different. So Z490 as a platform was the Comet Lake CPUs. They're both Intel 14 nanometer, and Comet Lake was the last of that enhanced Kaby Lake architecture, enhanced Skylake architecture before we got to something new. And Rocket Lake was a backport of, and I'll put the code name on the screen because I'm drawing a blank on it right now, but the architecture that went into the Tiger Lake mobile chips. And I want to say it was Sunny Cove, but I might not be 100% on point with that. So the move from Z490 to Z590 for Intel was mostly evolutionary on the chipset side. It did move to PCIe Gen 4 out of the CPU. However, most of the chipset features themselves, the memory interface, the PCIe lanes actually coming from the chipset, and the USB implementation were minor revisions. So we have 24 PCIe 3.0 lanes still coming out of the chipset. We have a increased amount of USB 3 coming in, mostly through the addition of USB 3.2 Gen 2, but not every Z590 implements that, and a lot of those are this up to, where not every chipset is going to literally give me the sum total of 37 USB ports that are potentially available. There's just not enough bandwidth to feed 3.2 Gen 2, 10 3.2 Gen 1, or sorry, Gen 2 by 1, 10 3.2 Gen 1 by 1s, and then 14 2.0s. You're just not going to get them. And some of them get used by lower speed interfaces. You might find some boards implement USB internally for, controlling some lighting stuff, or for like a PS2 port or something. But otherwise, you get this mix and match because they're all up to. The big thing that the Z590 chipset gained was an 8-lane wide DMI interface, up from a 4-lane wide DMI interface, which meant that those PCIe lanes and those USB controllers had more bandwidth back to the CPU. Okay, that was cool, but that was minor compared to what Z690 does. And we haven't even talked about the CPUs, but just Z690 is, from the CPU side, 16 PCIe 5.0 lanes, 4 4.0 lanes, plus 12 4.0 lanes from the chipset, plus 16 3.0 lanes from the chipset. DMI is still 8 lanes wide, but has moved to DMI Gen 4, which has doubled our bandwidth again. We now have support for DDR5 4800 memory, as well as DDR4 3200, because this is a transitional CPU. And then we still have our mixture of USB 3.2 Gen 2, 3.2 Gen 1, 3.1 Gen 1, 3.2 Gen 2 by 2, Gen 2 by 1, Gen 1, and then 2.0 lanes available. In addition to most of the other stuff, a lot of the other peripheral stuff hasn't changed any. We still have built-in gigabit networking. 2.5 gigabit is optional. We still have the CNVI support for various wireless standards, and then a few other features here and there. Nothing's majorly changed on the SATA side. SATA's basically going to stay where it is. So the chipsets themselves are a big deal. Z690 has taken everything that we were slowly picking up before and just done it all at once. And this is actually, that's a big deal. That is a lot more bandwidth going through everything. Do I think it's going to be utilized well? Probably not this generation. I expect the first gen of DDR5 to be kind of underwhelming. I anticipate that the PCIe 5.0 lanes available to the Z690 slot aren't going to get a ton of use in the consumer space. It's not to say that we won't see devices ship with it, but what I anticipate is there's going to be a Z690 counterpart that is built for workstations and small servers that'll use Xeon CPUs based on the same silicon, and those will likely get much more use out of that 5.0 lane or 5.0 interface for things like 200 gig networking, or, 200 gig networking is the big one that comes to mind. Even faster SSDs for storage arrays, things of that nature that, on the consumer side, it's going to be cool. Boards are going to brag about it, but I don't see it getting a whole ton of actual valid use. And now we haven't even talked about the CPUs. We've just talked about the chipsets and how those have changed over the past few generations, where 490 to 590 was small. 590 to 690 has just cranked everything up. Everything is faster. And that's huge. The CPUs themselves are completely different from what we're accustomed to. So Alder Lake introduces this concept of performance cores and efficiency cores. We've talked about this some. We mentioned that the efficiency cores were sort of Skylake level performance. These performance cores, presumably they're at least equal to Rocket Lake, if not better. I mean, it's a new CPU. The clock speeds look good, at least on paper. We're going to find out what happens. The caches all look good. and we'll get to those in a second. What we have right now are the details. We don't have the actual benchmarks. We have the details on the 12900, 12700, and 12600. 12600 is probably what Pocketables is going to end up with, just because of our budget. I'll probably have to flip our 11600 bench to try and cover a new 12600 bench. So let's start with the big one, the 12900K with 20 threads. Sorry, with 24 threads. This is 8 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores. On the performance side, we have the brand new performance architecture with a base clock of 3.2 gigahertz and a maximum turbo of 5.2 on all cores, 30 megs of L3 cache, 14 megs of L2 cache, and a sticker price of $589 for the K, $564 for the KF. Basically, most of these, the KF is $25 cheaper, so we'll not even bother with those for the most part. Honestly, it's a little bit more than the 12 or than the 11900 was, but when I consider that there are now 4 more efficiency cores, this is a new process, and we get all the other bells and whistles tacked on in the middle of a big silicon shortage, it doesn't seem wildly out there. It's definitely more in line than the prices we had heard estimated before. The 12900's never been the performance per dollar ship, and it's still under $600, which is good. I'd be complaining a lot more if it crossed that $600 threshold. But where things get weird is when we start talking about the 12700K. So the 12700K takes most of the things the 12900 does and turns them down just a little. We only get 4 efficiency cores, so now we only have 20 threads available, 8 performance with hyper-threading, 4 efficiency, 25 megs of L3 cache, 12 megs of L2 cache, a maximum turbo of 5 gigahertz. However, the base clock is higher at 3.6 gigahertz. The efficiency cores, we see the same thing. Our turbo is only 3.8, down from 3.9, but the base clock is now 2.7 gigahertz, and our sticker price is $409. I'm going to reserve any final statements until somebody has benchmark numbers on this. I can't wait to see what Anantech does. They usually do an excellent deep dive into these things. However, from me looking at the spec table, moving 200 megahertz slower on the peak and picking up 400 megahertz on the base is kind of a wash. There's going to be a couple of applications that really like that additional 5 megs of L3 and 2 megs of L2 cache. But for the most part, I anticipate that 12700K just keeping up with the 12900. And it's a K-series CPU, so the frequencies are unlocked, which if I want to invest in the time and cooling to push it to 5.2 gigahertz, just like a 12900 would, as long as Intel hasn't been to the silicon to death, well, I can. So I'm losing 4 efficiency cores. Okay. Depending on what uses them and how that actually works out in the scheduler, yes, that is a lot of CPU power to lose. I mean, if these efficiency cores are Skylake level cores, as Intel has said, that is effectively leaving an i5 6500 on the table. But that i5 6500 also wouldn't cost me the price difference between the 12700 and the 12900 if I just wanted to have a 6500 for doing some other background task on a separate system that maybe I've got Plex that I normally would have run it in the background on my system, but we'll just stick it in this old ThinkCenter and let it do its thing. I mean, that it's simultaneously a lot and not a lot to leave on the table. The 12600K continues the same trend in the same kind of weird way. So we lose 2 performance cores this time. I was kind of hoping that the 12600K would be an 8 plus 0 instead of a 6 plus 4. Just to see what that would do compared to an 8 plus 4. But anyway, so 20 megs of L3 cache, 9.5 megs of L2. You lose cores, you lose cache. Clock speeds, once again, 4.9 gigahertz on the maximum turbo, 3.6 on the base clock. Every time the max turbo comes down, the base clock comes up. Now, I understand that if I'm looking at Xeons. If I'm looking at Xeons, typically the less cores I have, the higher they run. But especially between these 3, I cannot imagine that taking, say, the 4 efficiency cores out of the 12900K to go down to a 12700K has any substantial impact on that 3.6 gigahertz base clock that the 12700 is rated for. Like, yes, there's power used, but I don't know. I don't know if this has something weird that plays in with the way the TDPs are, or what. Anyway, so that is Alder Lake in a bit longer than I had anticipated spending on this. Honestly, overall, I'm optimistic. And I'm not just saying that because our current test bench is Intel. I'm optimistic because this is all new. I mean, new core designs, new process, new motherboards, new chipset features, new PCIe Gen 5, new DDR5, all sorts of new stuff. The only thing that's really missing, well, is benchmarks, and hopefully we get those next week, and I have a similar conversation about that. Last but not least, I do just want to mention that we did run Free Game Friday this week. I actually used this same microphone on this week's Free Game Friday, and dark is dark. I don't really get the point. I'm just wandering around a haunted house that I took a nap in, but it was fun, so there's definitely a group of people who like that kind of spooky haunted house vibe for games, and no judgment there. I can see the appeal for some people. And this, by the way, is not going to be the permanent layout for this. This is just what I was able to manage in about 15 minutes before I could record here. There's a couple of things that we are not really taking advantage of. So right now I've got the Sound Blaster K3 Plus handling mixing duty and bringing the audio in via USB to our recording device here. The I/O Gear Upstream Dual does have a XLR input as well as RCA inputs, which means I should be able to use a non-USB mixer like our AMX7303, or just a phantom power injector and use the I/O Gear Upstream Dual as my mixing device and control my level there. However, because I switched phones, I don't have the I/O Gear app anymore. And I left the AMX7303 at home because I had been using this with my laptop when I did the stream record. So that's neither here nor there. That's just a commentary on, theoretically, next week there'll be less stuff on the desk. Although, who knows? Maybe I bring the 7303 in this week to play with it and find out that I actually like this better. Only time will tell. Although, well, I guess those mostly vanish in how dark that is. Let me know if you like this format better or worse than me standing here talking to you guys. It's definitely a little more relaxed sitting down. But there's a bit of my whiteboard behind the camera that I can't see, so I need to keep that in mind. All right, with all of that said, as always, I want to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables, either by using our Amazon affiliate links or by supporting us on Patreon. It's support like that that helps make content like this possible. I want to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing themes. And finally, thank you for watching.